Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about the very rapid change in the media landscape over the last couple of weeks. And if you're listening to this in the future, it is now the 23rd of November, 2024. And I want to do this little bit of media analysis and really almost a case study, which sounds incredibly boring, but I feel is quite necessary because it is good to enjoy your wins when they come, especially since we've been on the losing end of trying to bring back good, sane, healthy entertainment within our media for, I would say, at least 15 years. For myself personally, it would go back to probably the mid-1990s. But everybody needs motivation in some way. And positives and wins are motivation. Motivation to keep on going, to grasp onto, and really produce that thing which we want, which is good, healthy entertainment. And speaking of good, healthy entertainment, there are 2 links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels. You're looking at some of the spectacular art from my graphic novels in the background. There are 2 superhero graphic novels and 1 low fantasy. My books concentrate on the traditional idea of a hero, and our goal is to literally produce the best quality product that we can for our customers. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and see if my graphic novels are for you. All right, so back to the topic, and where is the starting point for this massive change that I'm speaking of within the media system? Well, it doesn't come directly from entertainment. It comes from a company that controls many media conglomerates, including many entertainment systems, and that would be Comcast. And one of the things about Comcast is it's a gigantic media company. It specializes in broadcast and cable television. It is the 3rd largest media company in the entire world. It provides internet service, telephone service. It has theme parks. But more important for us, it also controls NBC, which includes CNBC, and MSNBC, as well as other channels like USA Network, the Sci-Fi Network, Oxygen, Bravo, E! It owns Universal Pictures, which also includes DreamWorks Animation, Illumination, Universal Animation Studios, etc., etc. It is a gigantic company that controls media. And the thing is that since the re-election of Donald Trump, it seems like someone over at Comcast has finally read the room. And there are 2 different things that are going on here right now, which shows that someone has finally read the room. One of these is small and one large, but really it shows a movement in the same direction. Number 1, they've decided to, as they say, decouple MSNBC and a few other stations from their main NBC moneymakers. Now, why would they do that? Well, that leads into number 2, but I'll get to that in a second. The thing is that MSNBC pretty much led the charge on everything anti-Trump. It was the most Trump-deranged station out there to try to push for, as much as possible, his defeat. And they lost. And since that loss, they and other companies like them, who were quite clearly in the Kamala Harris camp, have lost almost 50% of their viewership. That is in less than a month. Now that brings us to number 2. The number 2, which is the small thing, is that NBC has a morning show. I think it's called Morning Joe. Correct me on that if I'm wrong. It's a 3-hour show that's on every morning. And the 2 people that present this show are the most extreme of the extreme of Trump-deranged individuals on NBC. Before the election, they called Donald Trump every name under the book, and his supporters, by the way, to demonize both him and his supporters. There is no skirting around that fact. But something interesting has come of that, if you haven't heard. The 2 presenters for the show, who are millionaires, really, after saying that Donald Trump was such a threat to democracy, that he was the equivalent of the funny mustached man from Germany in the 1930s, they have tried to salvage what they could by saying, okay, they actually know Donald Trump. So they arranged a meeting or reached out for a meeting to him and went down to Florida and kissed his ring and said on air, yes, this is what we did because we want to mend fences. We want to move forward. And people, their audience really, are scratching their heads going, excuse me, you just spent the last, I don't know how many years talking about how this person is evil incarnate, and you're going down and speaking to him and trying to mend fences. And what happened? They literally lost, it's estimated, somewhere between 15 to 30% of their viewership just from that show alone. That is to say, the show where they explained that this is what they did. But again, here's the thing. Someone read the room. I don't think it was these 2 presenters. I think someone higher up read the room. Now, it doesn't really matter who it was, but someone did that. Someone realized what is going on. They realized that what you have seen with the election of Donald Trump is the closest thing you will ever get in the United States of America to a referendum. And it's a referendum on what? It was a referendum on whether or not people wanted, quote unquote, progressive woke culture, whether or not they supported it. And the answer was clearly no. The answer for, I think, every demographic that they break down the voting into is clearly no. Now, some of those demographics did vote more than 50% in a yes way, but that was a significantly smaller number than they thought was going to turn out. And that's the point. They are diminishing returns. And the media analysis for what is going on here, which is first of all that they're trying to separate normal NBC from MSNBC because MSNBC was really the crazy train and it is affecting the viewership for NBC itself. That's why they want to decouple it from the main company, try to distance themselves. But again, they're doing that because they read the room. Someone read the room and said, the majority of Americans do not want what we're selling. And the importance of that cannot be understated. Why? Because these are giant conglomerations. And what do they want to do? They want to participate in growth industries. Now, if I get some of the terminology technically wrong here, please correct me in the comments. But the point is that giant conglomerations want to always participate in growth industries. What does that mean? They're looking at an industry and saying, we want this company, not because it makes us money right now, not because it has the potential to make us money, but because it not only has the potential to make money, but to make more and more money for us every year. That is a growth industry. Because it is the stated goal of the people who run the company to make money, more and more money, every year for its shareholders. And if they do not make more and more money for their shareholders every year, they're doing something wrong, and at best, they will be fired. At worst, they can be sued, but we'll get into that. And the point is, number one, this election was a referendum on whether or not people are going to continue to buy this information and these forms of media, and the answer is clearly no. Therefore, it is not a growth industry. It is a shrinking industry. Therefore, they do not want it. Or at the very least, they do not want it anywhere close to the form it is in right now. Again, the referendum showed that the majority of Americans do not want this, and that there are diminishing numbers in every category for the amount of people who do want this, which runs exactly contrary to how they sold woke, quote-unquote, progressive culture over the last at least 10 years. Now, some people in the comments always tell me, give us some examples of what you're talking about. These amorphous ideas don't really mean anything unless you give me some examples. So I'll give you some examples. This is the sort of case study of the entire thing. I have the most information on Marvel Comics as an entertainment company. And here's the thing. I used to listen to, before I even started my channel, so we're talking at least 6-7 years ago, Clownfish TV. Now, in Clownfish TV, you have a guy, I think both he and his wife worked for Walt Disney, and they worked for Walt Disney producing comic books, or at the very least he did. And he saw how Disney got out of producing comic books for its own characters anyways. You know, the main characters, Mickey, Goofy, Donald Duck, all that kind of thing. Quite honestly, a second ago, I could not remember Mickey's name. That shows you just how irrelevant Disney is becoming to me. Anyways, Disney once tried to produce a comic line on their own characters, and it failed spectacularly. The guy who runs Clownfish TV was at the tail end of this. He saw all of this going on. He knows that their company does not want to be a publisher anymore. They tried it, it failed. So he does not know why they still continue to produce Marvel Comics. He has been stating for, at least 5-6 years, at least, that he thought that Disney, as a company, was going to get rid of Marvel Comics because they don't want to be a publisher. They've already tried this. They're just going to get rid of it. And yet, even though he has good information, he's worked there, he knows how people who work there think, all of it, in his experience, points towards them closing down Marvel Comics years ago. It still hasn't happened. Why? And this also goes to answering the question of why in the world, when I just talked about people at Comcast actually reading the room, why didn't they read the room sooner? The writing, for most of us anyways, was on the wall a long time ago. How do they not know that? How does it take this for them to recognize that they need to turn around? I can answer those two questions at the same time. Answer them once again by going back to our case study of Marvel Comics. How in the world did Marvel Comics continue to exist in a company that doesn't want to be a publisher, that isn't making money from any of the things that it produces? Now, I know that the movies and the intellectual properties that they own through Marvel Comics makes them money. It was a growth industry, maybe not anymore, but a growth industry with movies and television. Yes, certainly. But why? Why in the world would they continue to have Marvel Comics? Is it simply to renew their rights on intellectual property? That could be it. But they could do that in other ways. Why do they continue to exist? Well, they continue to exist because the people in control of Marvel Comics sold the idea to their higher-ups that it was indeed a growth industry. That is to say, they sold the idea to their higher-ups that no, they understand they're not making money right now, but they can make a lot of money in the future, and they convince the higher-ups that the people who want the quote-unquote progressive, woke entertainment that Marvel Comics produces, spamming out progressive comics month after month, they convinced them that this was how the future was going to go. It wouldn't be that difficult because it is part of the quote-unquote progressive mindset that history is going in this one direction, this progressive direction, and more people will continue to embrace these progressive ideas. Therefore, they will get more and more of the market as they go forward, and it will indeed be a growth industry. And this is reflected in some of the things that I've covered on this channel in the past, especially the Women of Marvel podcast, which was the podcast really created and run by the person who was second in command at Marvel Comics, the person really in operational control, because the person who is seen as being number one in command really deals with the artistic. The second in command deals with hiring, firing, the structuring of all the things that need to be done. And the Women of Marvel podcast was this person's personal vehicle to talk about the things that she liked to talk about. And over again, I pointed out while going over those podcasts that they had this, what I considered absurd notion in the back of their minds, that all they needed to do was connect with that audience that they knew was out there waiting to lap up the entertainment that they were producing. And in their minds, once that happened, these flagging books that they put out month after month, year after year, would sell like hotcakes. They truly believed that. And they truly believed that because they were very, very heavy progressives on that show. Because she also had co-producers and presenters and guests and things like that. But the progressive mindset is that this is how the future will unfold, that more and more people will join the progressive bandwagon. So the idea was, you purchased this company dirt cheap, you've gotten in on the ground floor for something that is going to grow and grow and grow until this wave becomes a tsunami, and this is going to be the majority, the vast majority of people within the entire culture of America and the Western world at the very least. Now, let me break off here for just a second to give you some supporting information for this supporting information about how things are going to crumble. This senior vice president, second in control of Marvel Comics, was asked about 5 years ago in a Comic-Con panel, straight out, in a question and answer setting, she was asked by a random individual if your quote-unquote woke, progressive way of telling stories within Marvel Comics was hurting sales. And her answer to that was, well, no, it isn't. Why? Because even though the presenter said, we can look at the numbers, we can see that the sales are going down. Her answer was, no, it doesn't matter if you look at the numbers and you see the sales are going down. We can take that product after it has been produced within the normal places that it is sold, which is usually just comic shops, then turn it into a graphic novel and sell it to schools and libraries. And that's where they're going to shore up the money that they're making. But here's the thing. Have you heard some of what Donald Trump wants to do with the education system as soon as he gets in? He wants to revamp the entire thing. And he wants to counter very specifically the two-pronged attack that these people within Marvel Comics would use to sell their stories. Number one would be critical race theory. Number two would be promotion of the rainbow flag agenda. He says that he's going to counter the first by reintroducing civics and the idea that, yes, America is a great place, the greatest place on earth, and it can be great again to give people, really, pride in their nation. And secondly, if they catch anybody speaking to kids about the fact that there are more than two genders, that person will not only be fired, but also be sued for discrimination. If he does that, which he has claimed he will do, that will cut off completely the ability of this company to shore up its numbers by selling these progressive, woke comics and graphic novels to schools and libraries. It will be gone. But again, that's just supporting evidence. But let's move back to the idea of the growth industry. Even though, yes, what I've been talking about just a moment ago is part of that, because they kept on saying, look, our industry is growing because we can sell things to libraries and schools. But the point is that with this referendum on the culture that we have just witnessed, it is painfully obvious, as I said, to anyone that this is not a growth industry anymore. But let's move on to the second part of the question that I had a moment ago. How in the world has it taken these companies so long to recognize what is going on, to recognize that people don't want this stuff? We've been screaming it at the top of our lungs. People don't want this stuff. How have they not been able to recognize this? Well, let me give you two answers for this exact thing, which again is part of this case study and goes to proving the point that yes, there has been a change. First off, with this election, there has come a significant movement within media altogether. There has been more of a movement towards online media and decentralized online media for people to get their information. This is part of what the people on stations like NBC, CNBC are lamenting now over and over again, that they have lost their influence, and people like Joe Rogan or even Tim Pool have more of an audience and more of a control over what people understand is going on than they do. And the reason why we've gotten into this position is because the higher-ups at these companies were duped into thinking that this, once again, let's take Marvel Comics as our example, is a growth industry. That people are going to want this and more want it, so that you're going to make money more and more every year. How did they convince the higher-ups of that? Well, that is answered, again, not only in the Women of Marvel podcast, I've heard this answer several times, but also in the Writers Guild of America Zoom call that I covered a couple of years ago, which was literally labeled on YouTube, which is probably still there, as Queering Legacy Characters. They had about 3 hours discussing how to take characters that were straight in the past and queer them. And both of those podcasts talked very specifically about how to sell this to the higher-ups, because they knew that in order to do this, they first needed to sell it to the higher-ups. So they stated this very clearly in that Writers Guild of America Association Zoom call. So they were talking about queering legacy characters. So this is the Rainbow People agenda. So what would they do? How would they sell it? Because they specifically said, you have to sell it to the higher-ups. You have to bring them what they said was hard evidence that this was going to sell. So what you did was you went to an organization like GLAAD. GLAAD is an organization that is built up to help rainbow flag people, especially in this way. So they went to GLAAD and said, find us some resources that show that this is actually going to sell. GLAAD would then compile resources for them, massage the data in such a way that it would make it appear like if they sold this to people, they would lap up the rainbow agenda. Then they would give it to the person that requested it. The person that requested it would take it to their higher ups and say, here's all the information about how this will sell. You see, the people are on our side. You see, this is a growth industry. And that's how they sold it to people. That's how they tricked them in order to make the higher ups believe that what they were selling, this progressive media entertainment, was indeed a growth industry. So what's the point in going over all of this? Well, the point is that that is no longer available to them. We have had, again, this referendum on whether or not people want woke culture. And they have clearly said no. And every category has either itself clearly said no, or the number of people who said yes declined severely, which means it's not a growth category. You're not on the winning end. The majority of people have said no. Everybody in every category have said less and less yes if they did say yes. Everything is declining. Therefore, it is clear for everyone to see and will be pushed in their face for a minimum the next 4 years that this is not the way to go with entertainment and media. And again, the point is not that the people who are higher ups would listen to such reasoning, because they themselves are most probably highly progressive people, but they have now been painted into a corner. Because we've seen this over the last 2-3 years, especially in the last year and a half, where you have the higher ups at Disney saying, we're going to move in another direction. We're not going to concentrate on these culture war issues. These are specific statements made from the presidents of Disney. And yet they still go in this progressive direction. It's just a statement. They're just trying to quell the people's fears and then slow things down and still move in that direction. Why? Because again, like GLAAD, they could massage data in order to show, well, we can still do what we plan to do. We just have to move in a different direction as we do it. But there is no movement in that direction anymore that can show that it's a growth industry. If you do so, you're not only negligent, but grossly negligent. And again, if you're grossly negligent in handling the money of your shareholders can not only get rid of you, but they can sue you for gross negligence. And again, writing's on the wall. The referendum has been the popular vote for Donald Trump. No one wants woke culture anymore. At the very least, to the extent it is not a growth industry, and the companies, the large companies, must focus on growth industries in order to increase their profit every year, to give more and more profit to their shareholders. If that is not done, they will be gotten rid of. They will be sued. And the second thing that I want to look at is the fact that the supports for this entire thing have been eroding and are simply not there for these industries anymore. Let's look once again at our case study of Marvel Comics. One of the things I covered on this Women of Marvel podcast was the fact that they would regularly bring on these new employees, and what they were hired to do would be explained. And some of these women that were explaining what their job was at Marvel was to literally go on Twitter all day and not only help shape their media content within Twitter, but also use the information from Twitter in order to, once again, support the narrative that, yes, this is what people want in order to sell it to their higher-ups. That is no longer the case. That was no longer the case since Elon Musk bought Twitter. Why? Because more and more people were allowed to be on the platform. More and more people that don't want this progressive narrative. But really, the nail in the coffin was when he got rid of the block function, because that was one of the things they used. That's one of the things they state over and over again that they used in order to obtain this information, in order to prove to their higher-ups, supposedly, that it is a growth industry. They would block anybody who was negative, quite specifically. And if they could block anybody who was negative, and they were just saying, these are our interactions on Twitter, you can see on Twitter that it is a growth industry because the vast majority of people that we gain this information from want what we are selling, because it was extremely curated through the block button. But they can't do that anymore. And again, not only has the referendum of this election shown people that, yeah, if you're coming to us with that information, that can't be right. But they no longer even have the specific tools for this. And they can't move everything over to blue skies like they want, where all the comic professionals are going, because that's not a good sample size of the entire media landscape. It just isn't. Twitter is one of the biggest. I think it's one of the 3 big social media platforms within the entire world. So yeah, it was the town square. And they could use that to say, look, the town square says they want this, but that's no longer available to them. So things are crumbling around their ears over and over again. And what it really comes down to is the ideological point of what they're trying to do with this quote-unquote progressive woke media and, by extension, entertainment. And here's where I get into an admission of fault on my own part that I have not seen things as clearly as I should have in my analysis over the last couple of years. I've talked a lot about the ideology of progressivism and how they wish to have perfection, how they wish to advance themselves towards a utopia. And I had people in the comments saying, no, that's not what we want at all. But now, after looking at everything that's going on, I understand. Yes, this is still the ideological underpinnings of what they claim that they want, but it is not the real motivation for what they want. The motivation for what they want is simply control. And that does play out within your utopian setting because they want to control everything around them so nothing changes. This is part of the entire ideology. You go back to, again, statements like placing history behind a barrier of the unrepeatable, which your critical theorists like Max Horkheimer talk about all the time. Anyways, but it's more about control than the actual obtaining of this utopia. Once again, which is part and parcel of the utopian idea. But if you whittle it down, it's control. That's all they want. They want control. And it's important to make that distinction because They've sold the progressive idea through this entertainment-based, mostly entertainment-based, vision of a utopian Star Trek-like future that we will progress towards, and that it is an inevitable progression towards that. But now, once again, we've shown, not only once, but twice, with this second election of Donald Trump, that no, we're not going in that direction. No, it is not inevitable that we're going in that direction, certainly. That utopian ideal that you will sell to people in order to get them to follow along with your agenda, your narrative, is gone. And therefore, they're stripped down to the bare basis. The mask is off. All they want is control. And the giant media conglomerates went along with their delusion of control because it thought it would make them money. Sure, a lot of the higher-ups are of this progressive mindset as well, if not all of them. But the point is, they're hampered, once again, by their shareholders. This is why they tried so much to change it over to a stakeholder company system, where it's the entire stakeholder of society that must determine how you pursue your product and the money that flows from it. But no, you can't do that. It's not going to work. It's still the shareholders control. Therefore, you must feed the shareholders what they want, which is profit. If it's not there, you're gotten rid of, you can be sued. Too bad, so sad. You're not making money. If you're not making money, you're not a support system for this delusion of control within your progressive ideology. And if your quote-unquote progressive system of ideology loses that control over the narrative, because everything within their system is a narrative, once they lose the real or even the perceived narrative that they control the culture, then things will start to unravel for them very, very fast. And that's what we have to look forward to in the near future. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels that concentrate on the traditional idea of a hero, a merit-based construction system for putting together the story and the art, an old-school storytelling vehicle that gives the customer what they want instead of what you see around you in your progressive entertainment today. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later.